Feeling unwell and weak, I lay in bed. As my husband, Paul, grinned, he explained, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." The scarves and gloves that I had knitted with care for him were now carelessly discarded, and I couldn't help but notice. What he said hurt. I had to shake him out of his denial because he seemed so let down by me. My stomach dropped as I imagined him coming to terms with how naive he had been to believe that everything was working out for him. Sarah Riley is my name. Paul and I have been married for 6 years. Despite the fact that we are childless, we have been content in our relationship. Paul spends a lot of time away from home due to his employment. When I'm feeling lonely, he always tries to spend time with me on his days off, so it's not too bad. My father was Paul's boss when we first met, so I met him through him. Paul had the idea that I should stay at home and take care of the kids when we were married. With Paul's assistance, I could devote lots of time to myself, and the concept looked like a good one. I began exercising more, taking up sewing, and making friends with my neighbors. I experimented with many pastimes to occupy my time, but eventually settled on knitting and sewing. I used to make Paul scarves and gloves every winter. Though I failed miserably at my early efforts, I eventually became better. Paul went so far as to assure me they were on par with store-bought ones in the end. I was already a huge fan of sewing before hearing his encouraging remarks. Sewing with our future kid was a fantasy of mine. When I brought it up with Paul, he grinned and said, "Maybe I'll join in and learn when the time comes." This is the kind of thing that has brought me joy in life. Additionally, I was meticulous about cleaning and maintaining the house, and on Paul's days off, I made sure to spend quality time with him. We lived comfortably thanks to his generous salary, and I likely seemed fortunate from the outside looking in. I was content and assumed we would keep on living our lives apart, hoping to have a family someday. However, a shift occurred approximately 3 years ago. Just like every night, I was sitting here waiting for Paul to return home. All of a sudden, I was lightheaded and passed out. Paul hurried me to the hospital as soon as he got off work. I was laying in a hospital bed when I woke up, and I could hear Paul and the doctor talking. Found out that my ailment wasn't little and would be a constant companion throughout my life. Fortunately, it was not life-threatening. However, the doctor cautioned that it may occur again. I was advised to remain in the hospital until my condition improved. Seeing that I was anxious, Paul comforted me. "It appears that you will be hospitalized for some time, but that's good. I will drop by whenever I am free from work. No problem. We're in this together." As he spoke, he reassured me by holding my hand. Despite the lack of rationale, I clung to the belief that all will be all right with the unwavering support of my husband. Paul followed through on his promise and paid me a visit nearly daily thereafter. He took my hand, inquired about my well-being, and did his best to lift my spirits. He gave me my beloved stitching equipment after I complained about how tedious and long the days were at the hospital. While stitching, we would sit and catch up on each other's day's events. I was able to temporarily escape my ennui by teaching my clumsy spouse to sew, which was a really enjoyable activity. These joyful hospital experiences lasted for around 1 year. As is our custom every winter, I knitted him yet another scarf. However, following that, I observed that Paul's visits were increasingly infrequent. If he could just make an appearance every few weeks, I would consider myself fortunate. I pretended he was simply overworked and sewed to pass the time. I went so far as to begin knitting gloves in anticipation of his next visit, just to throw him for a loop. I was going to give Paul the gloves as a gift when I was free from the hospital because the doctor said I would be able to go home before the end of the year. I poured my heart and soul into those gloves, believing they would be a small token of my affection for you throughout our separation. However, Paul's reaction when he returned to visit after an extended absence broke my heart. Instead of being grateful, He stared at the gloves with icy eyes and asked, "Are you still making these?" When I gave them to him, "They're starting to be a real pain." Then, without hesitating, he presented me with the divorce papers and the scarf I had crocheted for him a year ago. The scarf appeared as if he had never wore it before. "How on earth did you manage to avoid a hospital stay for 3 whole years? I can't continue taking care of you, even though I heard you're going to be discharged shortly," he added. "It would be best if we split up." Upon hearing Paul's remarks, I lowered my gaze to the divorce paperwork. His signature was already on them. "So this is where we've ended up," I thought to myself. Since he stopped paying me frequent visits, I'll admit that I'd thought about getting a divorce a few times. Even though I told myself he was simply busy with work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. No matter how busy he was, the Paul I knew before would always make time for me. He would have informed me if his job had indeed become busier. I sensed this was going to happen the moment he began mysteriously vanishing. That's why I was surprised by how calm he seemed when I questioned his motivations for seeking a divorce. I had no intention of clinging to him. It was likely that he had begun to see me as a burden. I felt helpless if the Paul I had known before was now requesting a divorce. I remained intrigued, though. I was curious as to why he had reconsidered his earlier assurance that we would persevere through this together. In response to my inquiry, Paul said, "Isn't it obvious? I haven't had a single difficulty since we were married. Your annual gift of scarves and gloves is becoming old. You are the boss's daughter, and that is the sole reason I wed you. With you being ill on top of everything else, how am I supposed to handle this?" The way he laughed made me think he was making fun of me. He seemed unconcerned by the happiness I had experienced as a result of our shared life experiences and the numerous conversations we had over love, happiness, and loneliness. He didn't hesitate to tell me I was crazy to think such things. Who else would dare to wear a handmade scarf these days without experiencing some degree of shame? He said, "Receiving presents of that nature is simply inconvenient." I couldn't help but notice the expensive scarf around his neck as I absorbed his words. The one I gave him slipped my mind. There was a clear improvement in quality between this and the scarves I created. There was little need in contrasting the two. I couldn't help but question whether he had ever donned any of the garments I had crafted for him. I had no idea he despised them the whole time. My dad left the company not long after I was hospitalized, so Paul could finally stop acting as if he cared about me just to keep my father on his good side. On top of that, he may have used his wife's illness as an excuse to skip work. He went to great lengths to see me throughout the first year of my sickness, taking care of me while juggling my job. As I picture my father tending to his ailing wife and praising Paul at work before he retired, I can't help but think of all the hard work Paul put in. Paul had cultivated the image of a loving spouse, and his colleagues held him in high esteem because of it. Paul apparently stopped seeing my worth after my father retired. Now that he had discovered how beneficial I might be to him, he no longer had any need for me. I felt ill to my stomach as I told my spouse this, and he looked shocked. "I must say, bringing you up did make things simpler at work," he nonchalantly conceded. I was treated really warmly since everyone was sad for me. "My wife is sick" was all it took to get a day off, and if I worked a little extra, they would compliment me for being responsible. All of this was expressed by him without any trace of remorse. Unbeknownst to me, he had taken advantage of my sickness. To continue, he said, "Regarding the promotion I'm up for, the others are complete moron, but I must admit that your illness was a factor in that." With my head lowered, I listened intently. A smug grin spread across his face as I raised my eyes to meet his. My beloved had vanished, and in his place stood a stranger. He was being authentic here. "So long as I might be of service, I suppose that's excellent," I remarked. "Take care," I said, "as we likely won't cross paths again." He received the divorce papers from me. After that, he saw no sense in continuing our conversation and turned to go. Suddenly, our divorce was finalized. Soft sobs escaped my lips when he departed. I returned to my parents' residence after being released from the hospital. My dad got really angry when he found out what had transpired. He spoke with a high voice, saying, "I never thought he could be that kind of person." But for me, it didn't matter anymore. I reassured my worried father that I intended to return to live with them when I had cleaned up the house. I was told to do what made me happy because they understood. I have chosen to live with them for the time being. I wanted to see the house my husband and I had lived in before I moved back in with my parents. However, upon arrival, I discovered that the front door lock was not functioning. After exchanging puzzled glances, my mom and I decided to call out to someone. Someone unknown came to answer the door. My mind was spinning, so I turned to him for clarification. The man informed me that he and his family had recently moved into the house after purchasing it some time ago. They appeared content. Hearing this made my parents even angrier, but I was afraid upsetting the new family, so I kept quiet. Bowing low, I silently departed. But I couldn't let it stand there, so I contacted my ex-husband immediately. "While you were in the hospital, I sold the house." "Oh yeah," he casually answered the phone. "The sale proceeds are like a payment from me, so please hold on to them. Since it was always my house, I don't think you have anything to complain about, does it?" The apathy on his part made me sigh. In hindsight, I should have known sooner. The house was supposedly sold a long time ago, according to the new owner. About a year ago, when he stopped coming to see me, my husband probably placed it up for sale. I don't care if he was planning to divorce me. It was awful that he sold the house without telling me. We had already finalized our divorce when we signed the papers, but we had agreed to discuss payment and asset division once I was discharged from the hospital. He skipped our scheduled meeting for next week and went ahead and did what he wanted anyhow. I couldn't believe it. Even worse, he refused to acknowledge that he had acted inappropriately. Consequently, I spoke to him gently and asked, "You really don't understand anything, do you?" "What the hey? Could you please explain?" With a perplexed tone, he inquired. "Next week, I'll give you a detailed explanation," I said before ending the call. Before turning to face my dad, I grinned at my anxious parents. "I need your assistance getting ready for what's coming," I asked, spilling the beans about my plan. "I get it," my dad responded, his expression grave but encouraging. "I've already made all of the required preparations. We'll make it to next week's meeting, even though there isn't much time." Because he had previously suggested my spouse to me, I noticed a twinge of remorse in his gaze. His wrath at my husband's actions nevertheless motivated him to lend me a hand whenever he could. After thanking my dad, I patiently awaited the meeting day. I felt a smile creep up my cheek for the first time in a long just thinking about my husband's reaction. In order to be ready for the meeting, my father helped us get everything in order. My parents' home was chosen as the location for the conversation. Sitting side by side with my parents were my husband and my sister, while my brother sat alone across from us. It seemed as though he no longer cared that my parents were wounded by the divorce, even though he must have known. He was completely disrespectful toward them, and there was a small smile on his face. He seemed oblivious to the fact that he was acting haughtily. "I won't ask for too much, even though I'm the victim here," he started. "It will be sufficient to receive the proceeds from the sale of the house." He made it sound as like he was being kind by not asking for more, as if he were helping us out. My father became enraged when he saw his arrogance. I lowered my hand to his to soothe him. It was unnecessary for us to become angry. Neither of us wanted my husband to be at a disadvantage in this conversation, so we were prepared for that. "Let's address something important first," I stated while maintaining my composure. My father relinquished a document after I raised my voice. It proved that he was the rightful owner of the property on which the house stood. Without a doubt, the house was in your name, I confirmed. But my dad owns the land where the house is located, and he has the deed to it. I mean, come on, isn't that obvious from this document? His brow furrowed, my husband's countenance shifted ever so little. So what? He asked in response. I own the house. No one is entitled to lodge a grievance. Are you really certain that you can use that to get even with me? As though he thought the entire thing was absurd, he laughed. The house was technically in your name, so you could sell it legally, I said quietly. There can't have been any legal trouble with your activities, because I'm sure you double-checked everything before selling the house. Knowing there was no legal issue, my husband appeared assured. But, I continued, this is a major problem for the home buyers. My dad may collect rent from them even if you sold the house. We still own the land. Do you not believe that would undoubtedly lead to problems for them? Things aren't as they were led to think. For a moment I stood still. Neither my dad nor I have any intention of making them pay rent or leaving, but we also have no intention of simply ceding our land rights to them. Under such circumstances, we would offer the family the land for sale. It would be problematic for us if they didn't purchase the land, but we wouldn't demand monthly rent. I further explained that the land was given to us by our father so that we could live on it, and not so that others could buy it. The family may even sue you if they decide not to purchase it. They weren't expecting the deal, as I mentioned before. Think about how irritated they must have been. They thought they were buying their dream home, only to find out the land isn't theirs, and they now have more expenses. Straight after we got documentation showing that my dad was the legal owner of the property, we approached the new family and gave them the rundown. The fact that they acknowledged and accepted that the vendor was liable for any problems is a relief. The other party made it plain that they would sue my husband if the negotiations failed. I knew my spouse had fully grasped the seriousness of the issue when I noticed his face get pale. Because of his error, he knew this was going to be very expensive for him. What am I to do? He whispered with a quiver in his voice. The family can purchase the land from us, which would give them full ownership of both the house and the land, I calmly replied with a smile. After that, you'd be responsible for paying for the land. There will be no need for the family to sue you if everything is settled easily in this way. Everything will be okay once they have the house and the property in their possession. That being said, they will probably insist that you cover the land price since they were unaware of it when they purchased the house. It is your responsibility to address that, not theirs. The main problem is that the house may not have been worth as much as the property, which is in a very desirable position. You may still not come out ahead if you sell all your possessions. Perhaps nothing will remain when all is said and done. Alternatively, you might pay for the land and then purchase the house again, I said after a brief pause. The family residing there will naturally expect you to pay for their relocation. In doing so, you would reclaim the home and the land, which you could then put up for sale again, perhaps to a profit. However, once you've paid for everything, you could not even have a little bit left. I also mentioned that you'll be confused no matter what you do. The topic of alimony must also be considered. I intend to seek redress since your conduct has inflicted significant emotional suffering on me. Remember that. Paul had been using me to further his career all along. I was disgusted by everything he had done after I realized this. No matter how difficult it would be to establish and how likely it was that I would lose, I intended to sue him for damages related to the emotional distress he inflicted on me. Given his current predicament, it was crucial to bring up these topics. Paul, who was now surrounded, appeared unable to comprehend the complete gravity of the situation. It seemed like he could soon be able to make all of these dreams a reality. Observing the chance, my dad chimed in, I'm still well connected at the company, even though I do not work there anymore. Some of my former coworkers have informed me about your comments and treatment of my daughter, which I have been informed about by them. Paul, you've completely lost the respect of your coworkers. My father cheerfully broke the news to Paul, and I could see that he was finally getting it. Nothing mattered now, not the position he had acquired by taking advantage of me, not the money he had made from selling the property without my permission. I smiled and added, "Now, let's talk about what happens next." I then clasped my hands together. Asset division, remuneration, and the house are all matters that must be resolved. My smile at this moment was unlike any other smile I had ever given him. I felt a surge of strength and relief, and my smile was wider and brighter than it had been in a long time. "Hope you understand that this meeting will decide your assets since our separation," I went on to say. Even though he tried to shrug it off, Paul's eyes welled up with tears. The subsequent negotiations worked out well for me. Our settlement included Paul paying for the land on which the house was built, as well as his agreement to pay alimony to me. In the end, everyone benefited from the agreement, except Paul, after we explained everything to the family who had purchased the house. He was devastated. As word got out about the rumors my dad had started, Paul's reputation took a nosedive. His anticipated promotion was postponed due to concerns voiced by higher-ups. Paul quickly found himself out of a job at the company as the rumors persisted. I found out about Paul's resignation from my dad later on. You could say it's karma, I suppose. When one decides to take action, the things earned through taking advantage of other people might vanish just as quickly. Myself, I've taken up teaching sewing and am currently residing with my folks. The ladies and children in my community who attend my classes have helped me earn a fair salary, even though my classes aren't quite crowded. Sharing my passion with others provides me genuine joy, even if I never got the opportunity to sew with my own children, as I had hoped.